Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome everybody to this webinar on coaching constellations. Ko Kate Birch tako ingoa. My name is Kate Birch and I'm the new branch president for New Zealand. And with me is the lovely Mariska, who is the immediate past president and my very useful buddy and mentor. She's helping with tech this morning, and also we have John, who obviously is our presenter today, and I will do an introduction to you just a moment. So for housekeeping, if we could just keep our cameras on, if you're comfortable and okay to do so. I understand it's very early for people overseas from New Zealand. Keep mute on whilst John is speaking. Obviously, when you want to ask questions, then obviously we'll have a pause during the session this morning. Now, I believe it's right, Mariska, at the end there'll be a survey so that they can get their CCEU certificate. Yeah, so I think it's one CCEU for this particular webinar, and obviously if you did the full course, and there's an awful lot more. We have recorded already, so I hope you're comfortable with that. Okay, just before I do the introduction, I'd just like to do a karakia. Tu taua mai ronga, tu taua mai raro, tu taua mai roto, tu taua mai waho. Kia taue te Māori tū, te Māori ora ke te katoa, humie, humie, tai kie. I summon the power from below Mother's Earth, within oneself, and the surrounding environment. The universal vitality to infuse and enrich all present, unified, connected, and blessed. So kia ora, John. Thank you so much for doing this today. We are delighted to have you as part of our whānau today to share the knowledge that you bring. Very excited to find out more about this course. I have already bought the book and ready to get into that. So John obviously is based in the UK, but is coming to New Zealand very shortly at the end of May. It's very near now. And John is the founder of Coaching Constellations and the author of Systemic Coaching and Constellations. He runs an international coaching organization. And so on the 27th and 28th of May, I believe, he will be running the course in New Zealand, and he's going to give you a taster today of what that might look like. So over to you, John.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you so much. And Mariska and Kate, thank you for hosting this webinar, for the ICF for holding the space. I want to just say a couple of other thank yous first as well. Most importantly, perhaps to Patricia Bossens, who I hope you can see there with the blue background. Patricia, when many years ago, 10, 12 years ago, when working at Henley Business School, I know you still teach at Henley Business School, invited me to introduce this way of working into the masters on in coaching and behavioral change. And so the 2-day introduction is now a part of that masters 10 years later. And Patricia and I started a conversation 3 or 4 months ago, I think, when you saw that I was beginning to teach regularly in Sydney and across Australia, and this is the result of it. We were talking originally about the overlaps between the worldview of the Maori, the Maori perspective and worldview, and the systemic, which are, I think you will see, have many parallels. So thank you, Patricia, for starting this conversation, and look what you started. And secondly, I'd love to thank Tracy May, who is also going to wave frantically so you can see her. And Tracy is hosting the training for us and will be there along with Patricia. And so is taking care of bookings and the administration, and also the communication of the benefits of the training in New Zealand. So Tracy, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you in person again at the end of May. So yeah, I've been asked to facilitate an introduction to this work over the next hour, or for 1 hour, and then I understand that there's then half an hour I'll be here also for sort of more informal questions as they come up, questions about the work or the principles that underpin it, questions about the training. but I'm going to try and give you in an hour, which might set a new record, I don't know, a summary of the stance, principles and practices of the work. So if you want to go into speaker view, you should be able to get a view of my slides. Can everyone see this first slide? Okay, yeah. So I've already said this really, that first of all, the thank yous, and thank you to everybody for being here. And I really hope you find this hour useful. So what I'm going to try and achieve in the next 50 minutes we've got left is give you a summary of systemic coaching constellations, which is really also a summary of the book and a summary of what you might learn from joining a training group. So it's inevitably going to be fairly at an overview level and a top line level, but I hope that it will inform you of the principles, the practices, and the inner stance that's required to facilitate it. So I'm going to talk about, first of all, systems and what systems and systemic really mean in this context, because there's a lot of people in the coaching industry, as well as clients, have different ways of using the word systems. For many people, it means team. In this way of working, that's not that, although it embraces working with teams, certainly. It's more of a worldview and applied philosophy about working with individuals, teams, or indeed whole systems. So I'm going to say a little bit about that, and then we'll have some questions and discussions every 10 or 15 minutes or so. And please don't feel you're interrupting me. If you need to ask something, and just turn your microphone on and ask. Don't put things in the chat, I won't see them. Just jump in and ask away. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about systemic coaching at the more practical level, visual mapping the constellations, and give you some examples, and then give you a little taster experience of it. So really, if you summed all that up, I'm going to talk about the stance, the principles and the practices. And then after the hour is up, I'll be around for 30 minutes for Q&A. So first of all, what do we mean by system in this context? And I'm often saying on the trainings that if you're interested in systems, the first system to be interested in is yourself as a system. And many of you will be familiar with this idea already and the use of self in coaching. But it stands really centrally in this way of coaching, where we're using embodied information and embodied mapping to access dynamics and patterns of belonging in systems. And if you like, I think the way that I think about it and teach it is that we have three centers of intelligence: our head center, our heart, and our body. And so the training journey, the book, I hope all invite you all of the time, not just to think about how you might use this method and this philosophy with your clients, but importantly, what it means for you. What about your system and your whole self? Because using the whole self is really central. I'm sure most of you will know David White, the philosopher and poet. He has this lovely phrase: the road home is the road back to the body. I think that's true at an existential level. It's also true at the level of coaching, that when we're in our bodies, we are much more able to be present. Being present is a combination of things, but it starts with being in the breath, the body. So even as you're listening to me talking, I would invite you to...
Stop it. Stop it. Lie down. Now. Lie
Somebody's
down.
got a pet, a very naughty pet. Is your dog lying down? It's a message for the dog as well. Be in your body. and your breath as you listen to me and as we go through this session. I know that may be challenging at 9 in the morning, but see if you can really feel your feet on the ground, be present to yourself as you're listening. Because this work is all about understanding yourself and where you come from and who you come from. And so as you're sitting in your chair listening to me, I just invite you, even at just an introductory level, if you like, just to begin to imagine all the systems in which you've belonged behind you like a peacock's tail. This is why there's a peacock's tail on the front of my book. That's why we use the metaphor throughout the training, particularly on the first day of the training. Do an embodied exercise around this. To really hold a systemic method safely in your hands, you need to be on a journey of understanding and integrating the systems behind you in which you have belonged, with all of the joining, belonging and leaving that has taken place, that's resulted in you being here today. And so you could think of it, if you like, in graphical terms like this. And we come from various clusters of systems. Of course, the deepest pattern maker for our life and work is our family system of origin. And that's also nested in social and cultural systems, which we came from, and perhaps the different ones we're in now. There's also other kinds of systems of belonging that you join as you move from childhood into adulthood, educational systems, professional systems, and indeed your current professional system. Of course, being an independent coach can be challenging for this particular reason, that there can be a lack of sense of belonging. It's why organizations like the ICF are very important. Whatever is behind you, and there will be specific things to you, perhaps these empty ones and many others, there will be a mix of hidden loyalties. You could say unconscious loyalties, perhaps, some of which hold us back, limit us, some of which resource us. Hidden dynamics, patterns, again, some of which may limit, some may resource. This again is something we look at in more detail in the trainings. And also all systems have hidden resources in them very often, especially perhaps as coaches. We don't turn and invite them to resource us very often. So when you've done all of that, then you can turn to face your clients and imagine all the systems in which your client has belonged behind them. So if you like, it's a shift from, I'm going to talk about teams a bit later, but let's start with individual coaching. The figure on the left is the coach, and this one is the client. It's a shift from this intrapersonal, important intrapersonal focus to an increasing inclusion, awareness of the systems of belonging behind your clients, systems of belonging, some of which will have been joyful, some of which will have been painful, some of which they will have left really well, some of which they will have had very difficult leavings. But all of that influences their ability to show up and find their place and authority and leadership and voice in their current systems. Patricia shared with me a paper several months ago, which was about the Maori perspective. And I thought, so these are sort of, I don't usually, of course, have these slides in this introduction. I wanted to include this morning. One of the greatest gifts of Maori ways is locating the person in a relationship of deep belonging within the universe. I love that phrase. It really sums up this work as well. And the central importance of belonging, which I think one could argue is the deepest human need. So if it's the deepest human need to belong in relationship systems, starting with our family and then social, community and professional, then it's really important, I feel, to include the dynamics, loyalties and patterns that can emerge from those systems of belonging. Hence the peacock's tail metaphor. So here it is again, and this is a sheet which I often use with clients. We teach how to use this successfully with clients training, and it's a different way of thinking about the coaching challenges. It also really is important with teams, because teams not only have this lovely small team here, 5, they have their own individual peacock's tail feathers, metaphorically speaking, behind them, all the systems in which they've belonged. But so does the whole team. So a team is a system. Actually, it's a subsystem of a larger system called an organization. And a team has all of these complex things behind it as well. And when you include these, then the system can settle. And you may only be including it in your inner stance and attitude, and some of your systemic questions may emerge from that inclusion, like who has belonged in this team before. And this work is very interested always in the origin story. So for a team, it's what was the original purpose and formation of the team. And teams often have very complex backgrounds, come from mergers and acquisitions, or mergers of teams, or teams that are created without a real need. People often burn out in those because there's no purpose to them. Or teams that were created with real clarity, and where belonging and safety is really embodied and clear. So this frame gives us a way and a method of looking at it all. And of course, you extend that out to whole organizations. What has happened in organizations, mergers and acquisitions are a subject I return to often. I usually call them murders and acquisitions, because usually people get really damaged in mergers, especially when they're actually acquisitions. That's a whole 3-day workshop in itself. But they're just little snapshots of examples of sort of things we might include in our view when we're looking at systems. When a system is us, me and you, a team, an organization, and even a country. Of course, countries have peacock tail feathers. And it's really important to include that when you're looking at things socially. The second and last quote from that paper, attending to the life energy of an organization is an important yet often overlooked aspect of management and leadership. Systemic coaching isn't just a sort of a fancy method, or even not a fancy method. It's not just a philosophy, it's in service of something. It's in service of organizational system health. So a flow of leadership and organizational system health. So this idea that this phrase life energy of an organization I hadn't heard before, and I think it's a lovely phrase. Many of you will know that systemic work of this nature originated in family systems. It's, as many coaching methods do, developed first of all in a more therapeutic context. And Bert Hellinger, the German polymath who developed this particular way of thinking and working, talked about the flow of life and love in family systems. And my last 20 years I've spent supporting the migration of that idea and the method and the philosophy into coaching and organizations, where, as I say, it supports the flow of leadership and organizational health. And so it invites us to move from this linear perspective of what an organizational system is, to more of the reality of an organization. I imagine everybody on this call can make sense, even if just in your body alone, the complexity that's visualized there, because we've all worked in organizations where, if you're in a leadership role, it can feel a lot more complicated than that, much more like that. In fact, it's more complicated still, I would argue, because it's moving as well. So maybe some sort of sign of stop playing. And this is a flock of starlings who usually fly. Thank you. There they go. Oh. I'm going to reduce the screen size so perhaps it play more easily. That seems to work. So I think this is a really useful metaphor for an organization. Perhaps that's a large corporate, all of the joining, belonging and leaving, all of the people trying to find their safe place of belonging to make their contribution. The mergers, the acquisitions, the people who fall off, and the people who join, the way that leaving and ending is attended to. I think it's a useful description, if you like, visual description of how organizations work. But it's complicated, and the question is, how do you access that level of complexity in a meaningful and manageable way? And that's where the visual mapping and constellations method is so useful. So for some reason my PowerPoint seems to have gone go slow. But I've learned over the years that everything is information. So when this sort of thing happens, I just enjoy the moment and wonder what it might mean. Perhaps it's time for a question or a reflection while it decides it wants to operate. Anybody got a question or reflection? Please feel free to turn your microphones on if you have.
Just a quick question, John, or an observation that maybe will turn into a question. Using the metaphor of the birds, you know, looking at that pattern, it looks like that system is self-regulating in that it has its own sort of intelligence and flow. So, and it's, you know, the complexity is off the charts, really. So I'm just wondering, when you encounter a system in your work, how do you decide what element you want to hook in on?
Yes.
You know, because there's so much that you could do and so much you could participate with.
That's right. Yeah. So that's a lovely question. Thanks, Tracy. So the work is in service of the whole, but my goodness, how do you do that with that level of complexity? And this is where, hopefully now the slides are working, this is where visual mapping of parts of the system, it's very unusual to map the entire system, although that can be done if you group elements. Visual mapping, so you can find out what the unwritten rules of belonging, let's say it's a shorthand to answer your question. What are the invisible rules here of how do you operate? In the trainings, we call them unwritten rules of belonging, and teach how to surface them respectfully. And because this work is very much beyond ideas of right and wrong, we're just interested in gathering the information without making any judgments over it. And inviting a client to create a map, perhaps starting with, this could be organizational culture, these could be people, is a very powerful way to do that. Because each organization every system is influenced by consistent principles described in the book and in the trainings. Every organization also has its own unique unwritten rules of belonging. And when you know about both, you can really make the difference that you're describing. And you can do it in a respectful way. And I wanted to give you a few examples of client work of mine. This is over 5 years ago. So before the pandemic, when we were face to face a lot. This perhaps is an example which also addresses your question. This is a new CEO, a woman who is trying to find their place and voice in a large leadership team in a substantial organization. And she had talked about it to me, with me, but it wasn't until we did the mapping and I asked her to include everybody that belongs in the system that this person suddenly appeared. This is the former chief executive, also a woman, who'd been there for 27 years. This immediately explained why these members of the leadership team were being so apparently disloyal to my client and loyal to her. You can see this one here looking directly at the previous leader. So the advantage of this work is rather than only talking about the situation, the client is also able to see and be with and be in the issue, because it quickly comes to life when you bring it to life on the tabletop or in the room. So I'm going to give you another couple of examples in a minute, but I wanted to make sure I included this slide. You may be thinking, well, this is all very interesting, but when is it useful? I think constellations were invented, if you like, to resolve stuckness, because they reveal what's hidden. So when you're stuck as a coach, very useful self-supervision technique. When individuals, teams, or organizations are stuck. It's also very useful when a goal can't be met, or somebody says, well, I still haven't met that goal. Because we include hidden loyalties that would make you feel very guilty if you moved away from that unconscious bond, you may never reach your goal, even though you keep telling your coach that you really want to. Of course you want to, but something deeper is holding you back. Any kinds of repeating patterns of limiting behavior or other repeating patterns that limit organizations or teams, this method is really useful for. A good sign of an organization that is likely to find systemic perspective useful, not necessarily welcome, but useful, is when the past is never discussed or included. Organizations and individuals that only look to the future are almost always, I would, a bit risky to say, but I would say always, trying to get away from something in the past that hasn't been included, acknowledged, or given its place. And 9 times out of 10, that's a problem in organizations. The systemic problem, it's held in the system. Where you sense in your body or in the bodies of your clients difficult dynamics. So you might feel as you walk towards a client or as you sit down with them, a breathlessness or a tightness in your chest. I would really encourage you, whether you choose to learn this method or not, to trust that information. The body is the unconscious, as Eugene Gendlin said many years ago, and we hold our unconscious truth in that body. And we know what's true through using our body. So it's very, very powerful. Whenever you hear of an organization where they say there's a lack of trust or safety, you can be sure that there's something held in the system that is beyond something you can talk your way out of. And an organization where leavings are not well attended to. And I don't know about you, but I meet a lot of those. Leaving well is the least well attended to dynamic in organizational life, I think. And many coaches have a difficult, painful leaving in their past. And that's one of the things we look at in the experiential training, because it's really important to integrate and resolve your own difficult leavings, because you're bound to meet what you have not resolved in yourself in your portfolio of clients. And lastly, in these examples, there are many more, when there's exhaustion or burnout. And I wanted to share this example of, I'm not going to share the details of who is who, but a client I was working with some years ago who was the founder was suffering from a burnout dynamic. This was her here. And she found through this mapping process, never having done it before, that there was an equivalent burnout in another system in which she was a member. And so she found this level of clarity incredibly useful. We did some work about separating out her invisible loyalty to this system and resourcing her in this system. So, and that probably took about 30 minutes. So it wasn't a conversation, it was a constellation. And so it is, I find anyway, a respectful way of having difficult, facilitating potentially difficult processes with clients in a safe and manageable way, because they're doing the mapping, not you. Another example is very useful in mergers and acquisitions. In this case, a CEO was mapping the dynamics that resource and limit the two systems that were coming together. This was the system that he was leading, and this was the system they were being effectively, actually it was pretty close to a genuine merger, but you can see from the position on the screen, this one was also culturally taking over the bottom one. All this kind of visual information is important. This is working one-to-one with somebody. This here is a representative for my client. She was the head of world sales for an organization run by two founders, you can see here. And I asked her to map out the previous organizational systems she had been in. And she then saw straight away in less than 10 minutes that had been stuck in this pattern from the past two organizations. And then this, of course, no surprise, was her family system, where she was triangulated between her mother and father, who were always arguing, just as all of the founders she worked for were. When she saw that, put her in touch with her therapist. She worked with that and came back a couple of months later in a very different place, very much less entangled. This work isn't therapy, it's highly therapeutic, but that's different. We're not attempting to do therapy. And we're looking into the past so that we can leave the past where it belongs, in the past. And then your clients will move with much more ease into the future. Tabletop mapping of the kind that you're now familiar with from these pictures is also something very useful to use with a team. In this case, I was working with a team who were represented here, and they're sitting around the table. There's 6 of them, and they each chose a representative for themselves at the beginning. It's in a large European bank, and I then asked them to map each of the other divisions of the bank that they connected with, the other senior teams. And then finally, because direction is very important, I asked them to place a green post-it note where they felt each of these divisional systems was facing. And as you can see, none of them were facing towards them. And their brief to me was, help us find our voice in the bank. Once they saw this, and then we unpacked the origin story of the wider system, it was very, very useful for them. So this was a 2-day team away day workshop. This was the first morning, and then the rest of the time we did what you might call more conventional coaching and facilitation. But this kind of set the agenda for those 2 days and freed them up as a system. In the book and in the training, there are various structural exercises. So that's rather than those free form ones you've just seen. So structure where you, for example, invite a client, in this case, the head of the team, to place the team members in a circle in order of joining. And this is an exercise that we repeat in the trainings and teach about how to use it. I think this might be the last one. You can use this method, as you can imagine, with an actual team actually representing themselves, or in this case, and this is actually at Henley Business School a few years ago. Trisha, you might recognize that room. This is an actual client. These are clients of the coach who was in the room, and these people are representatives. They're people who don't know anything about the client or their team, yet with almost no information, they find, and this is the extraordinary aspect of this that you'll experience at the trainings, that they know exactly what each team member thinks and feels and where they want to be in relationship to each other. It's a fast and efficient, I think, with his words, way of really seeing what's the constellation of the team. During the pandemic, when we thought we were going to have to close up, we suddenly discovered, much to my own surprise and the rest of the team, that this work works very well online, individually and with teams. And if we have time, I'll show you the digital demonstration a little bit later, but you can use this method, the mapping and constellating, which is a facilitated map, very effectively online. I pretty much only work online with my one-to-one clients now. Just saves so much time. So, experiencing the approach, I want to come out of these slides and say hello to you again, come back into the room and the group, and give you an opportunity to just have a little taster of this work. You will have understood that it's based on representing systems. So you choose representatives for people or elements of the system, like the culture or money. You don't need any prior experience to be a client of it or to self-facilitate. I'm going to guide you through a short process. And to do that, just invite you to just maybe sit back a bit, take a breath, and really think about the portfolio of clients that you're working with at the moment. And perhaps a particular client has come up for you while I've been talking. And see if you can focus in on a client with whom you feel stuck, can't find your voice or place as well as you do perhaps with other clients. And there's something about this particular client, and if you're not a coach or you don't have clients at the moment, then you could think of a colleague or a friend. But in this coaching context, see if you can focus on a professional connection. And then I want you to, with your embodied sense of that client, have a look around the space that you're sitting in and choose a physical object to represent that client. It could be, I've got a pair of headphones here, or a Tipp-Ex bottle, or a stapler, or a calculator, or a pair of glasses. Don't be flippant about it, but don't worry about it too much either. Just have a look first and then pick something to represent this client that you're thinking of. And just hold them in your hand. Just have a look at them, noticing which hand feels right. This isn't about trying to make it better or anything like that yet. It's just to allow yourself an embodied experience of being with this client. Just how does that feel to hold them and look at them? And what distance do you notice that you hold it at? Are they close or far away? I want you to put that representative for the client with whom you experience some kind of difficulty down on the table in a particular place that has relevance without knowing really what that means. And this work is all about relative place and relative direction of attention. So if I was using this Tipp-Ex bottle, I would say the front of the bottle is the face. They're facing this way. And so I want you to pay attention to where are they facing. And now I'd like to invite you to choose a representative for yourself, another object on your table. And bring those two representatives into relationship with each other, not as you would like it to be or think it should be or wish it was, but just as it is, paying attention to distance and direction. And also you can explore relative size, which representative object is bigger or smaller. You could do this on a piece of paper or a clear space on your desk. It's useful to do it within some sort of boundary. So a piece of A4 paper is useful. Noticing how close each of you are to the boundary, how far, whether you're looking at each other, all of these things you can begin to tune into. And now I'd like you to include, perhaps just in your imagination, or if you feel it's important, you could select an object, something in the peacock's tail feathers of the client that either shines a light on what's difficult between you or resources them. It's up to you. Something that is relevant to the client that you know about or have a hunch about, something they've said perhaps, or something you picked up or you wonder about. For example, you could imagine the last person who occupied the role that they are currently occupying, because they're very often, they haven't left the system cleanly, standing, metaphorically at least, right behind. People that struggle to find their authority are usually often occupying a role that's been left in a very difficult way. May not be anything like that. It could be something else that comes to mind. Just trust your gut, brain, your body to intuit. If nothing comes to mind, then that's okay. I should say comes to your body, that's okay. Don't worry, you don't have to put something there. But just be interested and curious. What's in the field behind your client, this particular client? And then do the same for yourself. What is it that you could place behind you that resources you to look at this client in a fresh way, a less entangled way? So, and this, again, it could be, you could write it on a piece of paper or a post-it note, or you could choose an object that represents a resource for you as a coach or as a professional. And if you've chosen something personal rather than professional, then who or what would resource you? And where do they stand behind you? How close, how far, what size? These are the things we're interested in systemic mapping. I hope this isn't making sense, because then you'll be invited into your unconscious, and that's much more useful than what you think you should be doing. So don't try and get this right. Just see if you can sink into your body and breath. And all you're trying to do is create a map of what is. That's the basis of this work. Look at it and notice what comes up. And we're going to pop you into breakout rooms in a minute. Goodness, we've used a lot of time, I'm sorry. And just to share together what you noticed as you created the first map. And if you want a shorthand for that, rather than talking a lot about it, see if you can find a sentence of truth that just sums up what it is you noticed as you stood there, you and your client, represented in front of you. And what you notice that's different when you bring in a resource. Any questions before you go into a breakout and explore in pairs together? Mariska, thank you. Could you pop everybody into pairs and take about 6 minutes, 3 minutes each way, just to share? I know that's not very long, but I want to honor the time boundary we've got. And then come and do some sense making as a whole group. some people may not be there anymore, perhaps.
I'm trying to see. I'm seeing. Okay, let's move you to room 7.
Are you there, Candice? Oh, somebody's come back.
Sorry, Mariska, I didn't have anyone in
Yes.
my group.
Oh dear. Can you remember which room you were in?
10, I think.
10. Okay, let's see. Helen Zink is there now.
Oh,
So
okay.
she's sitting on her own.
Okay. So, yeah, I was
Correct.
too. So could you put me back in there?
Yeah, let
I've
me
left the
just,
room.
I'm going to move you back to, let's see if that works. I'm going to move you to 9. Don't click the link yet.
Okay.
And then move you to 10. Okay, you should be able to join.
Perfect. Great.
There you go. Yes.
I am here, but I'm just with my kids. It's 2 hours beforehand because I'm in Melbourne, so I can't join at the moment. I'm just getting my kids ready for school, but I'm really enjoying the session. So just
Oh.
listening in. Yeah.
Thanks, Candice. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have any, did you manage to do the exercise at all in your mind?
Sort of. I've done a little bit of work around this space, and yeah, the online, I think, constellation is really interesting because yeah, a lot of it's going on to online these days. But yeah, I've used little like other figurines, just random things that I've toys actually. I find that kids' toys are very
Okay, yeah.
yeah. So I'm just going to jump off at the moment.
Thanks, Candice.
Thanks, Candice.
Problem.
And Lou, are you still here? I just noticed that you got not joined, and yet I can see you at the on the.
I have Candice and Lou in the same room because Lou didn't join, and I don't know whether Lou maybe
just
left.
listening as well.
Maybe, yep.
Yeah. You can never tell when it's not a pilot.
Is this making sense? What we've covered so far, content-wise, I mean.
Yes. I've got, I think it just gives you a sample of what it's about. I think it's great, and it also is intriguing because you want to find out more. So yes, I'm sort of in that conscious that I don't know enough.
Well, me too, yeah.
Always. Will get me reading the book now.
It's not just about buying it, you know.
I know, isn't it annoying that you actually have to read it as well? And it's even just sitting there. Unfortunately, life just got extremely busy and I have no time at the moment, but that will change.
2 months ago, I took about 45 coaching books I've honestly never read. Well, you know, when you find a new book, oh, this is fascinating. And like most coaches, I just buy books like their bread and butter. And I thought I'd take them to Oxfam and somebody will make better use of them because it's too late now for me to read 45 coaching books.
Gosh, 45.
So, yeah, I love coaching books, and as most coaches do. But yeah, actually reading them is a different thing altogether, isn't it? Yeah. But I hopefully, because I'm dyslexic and it took me 10 years to write, there's lots of pictures in there. And it's quite, lots of exercises and case studies, a bit like this presentation. So hopefully it'll be an easier read.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Good to know. Good to know.
I mean, you haven't bought your copy yet, Mariska?
Not yet, no. Kate was very kind to actually give me a book voucher, and my thinking was, well, I know what I'm going to use that book voucher for.
Good.
So yes, definitely going to be doing that. And as for the getting to read it, I have found that allocating about half an hour during my wind down in the evenings and reading in that space instead of interacting with electronic stuff is helpful. So that's the way that I get through my books.
Great.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
Nice.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say when you have your wine, when you said.
Well, yeah, it can go with wine if you want. I normally don't drink that late at night. So
Is it all making sense to you, Mariska?
It is. I'm finding it interesting that so the way that I've laid mine out, I'm looking in the same direction as my client, although we are not looking at each other. So that was interesting. And I'm also noticing that the resources compared to my size, so my size compared to my resources size, and their size compared to their resources size are quite, it's almost the opposite. So I'm small, my resources are big. They big, their resources are small. So that I found quite an interesting one, just observing it.
And how does that make you feel?
How does that make me feel? It makes me want to share some of the resources that I have, because it's almost like I can duplicate them. I know I can, I don't need to keep them with me. I can sort of share them out.
Yeah.
In order to enlarge the resource pool that they have behind them. One of the things that I am finding a little bit concerning is the fact that they are very close to the edge of my piece of paper, whereas I'm sort of more sitting in the middle and sort of going, okay, not too sure what that is about.
Well, yeah, it'll come to you though over coming days as you think about it. Leave it there like a fridge magnet sort of thing, and you know, when you look at it this evening or tomorrow, you'll have insights just by leaving it there, and find what you can say about it that's really true in about 6 words. You know, like, my resources are available for you as well. If that's true, only say what's true. Saying things that you don't have to say them out loud, but you can say them. These short sentences are very key part of the work, is learning to express the truth, the essence of the truth, just in a few sentences, a few words. Or, you know, you're not the client for me, or I'm ready and available, and tell me what's useful. Or little phrases like that can be very useful to clarify, or even, you know, when you're thinking about the next step or something. So what to do next. You know? So what sentence comes to your mind, having now I've said that?
It's interesting. The word succinct comes to mind. And the thing that the client is working on is speciality. They want a speciality versus being a generalist.
Okay.
So the succinctness, the pointedness to it is an interesting.
Yes. Tell them I've got a speciality too, if that's true. Because you have, haven't you?
Yeah, speciality to me is an interesting space to be in.
Actually, aren't we? Sorry.
Yes, true.
5-2, yeah. Sorry.
Okay, so close all breakout rooms.
Everybody back. Close them all, yeah.
They will have 30 seconds to come back.
Right.
Hopefully they did their little switch around.
Hopefully.
That was an interesting conversation to observe. Thank you, both of you.
Right.
There you go. For those that didn't join, there was a short demonstration.
Yeah.
Via recording.
Yeah. Welcome back.
Hi everybody. Welcome back. I'm a bit of a I think it's really important when you create a contract with a group that you stick to it. So I'm very aware we've got 4 minutes left of the 1 hour boundary, and I'm also completely here for the half an hour after that. So I want to, you know, start questions and answers. Well, questions anyway. I may have some answers. And if you need to leave, just find a way of saying goodbye, either visually or verbally or both. And you're very welcome to peel off as we come to a close. is there anybody that needs to leave quickly who hasn't already just then, wants to ask something or say something before you leave? Please go ahead, and then I'm here for half an hour for those who've got a bit more time. But I hope it was useful for you, and I'd love to hear some things about that exercise and what you discovered. Feel free to just speak when you're ready. Turn your microphone on if you want to say something.
John, I'd
Lisa.
love to ask, hi everyone. Just love to ask you about the element of trust, and if you could just say a few words about when we're looking at people's systems and the systems within which they are embedded.
Yes.
How does trust come into play for you, or how do you deal with developing the trust?
Gosh, what a beautiful and huge question. I mean, I argue in the book that we have 3 human needs. One is belonging, one is recognition, which in the family means being met in our feelings, in an organization also means being met in our feelings and allowing our essence, our truth to be expressed. And the third one is safety. So, and I think I would argue that systemic safety is underpinned and resourced by different things to the idea of psychological safety. Although obviously they're closely related. Trust won't emerge unless those 3 human needs are articulated and understood and integrated and lived by the leadership team, by the leaders and the leadership team. So belonging, safety, recognition. Now, you probably won't meet many organizations that do that because they wouldn't need a coach or any organizational consulting, because everybody would trust their sense of place and that their voice has value and that they belong safely. But are you a coach?
Yes, I am.
Yes. So you won't meet any of those clients because they wouldn't need you if they had those things in place. So I think those are the things that underpin a culture of trust. But organizations very often break people's trust. And organizations that break people's trust. Thank you for your comments coming in. Attract people who are used to having unsafe environments. So it creates like. That's a short answer to a huge existential question.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Lisa. What other questions or observations from the breakout rooms that you?
Hi, John. Just following up from what you just said. When we start fixing organizations, do we start with the individual or the teams?
Well, I'm going to challenge you on that word fixing.
Yeah, I know. That's why I used inverted commas.
I'll share one of my favorite quotes with you. I think this is actually central to the work. I mean, you could think about the drama triangle, but this is a Bert Hellinger who developed the work, and I met several times. Giving up wanting to help or rescue people is essential if you really respect them. And I think the question for us coaches is, can we tolerate not fixing and not helping and keeping ourselves the right relative size and place in the system? And I recently published an article on LinkedIn, I've just put it in the chat, about this subject because I think it's deeply connected to your question and to the question that we all hold as coaches. Can we tolerate not making a difference? I've also put the link to the flyer for the training for those who are interested. So what was your question again, without the word fixing in it? Where do we start? Individual or client? Okay. Oh, or team.
Well, I guess the word, sorry, would be when working with individuals, the verb I got to is assisting. I'm still, when it comes to organizations, I still I still have a real issue in thinking of it as fixing, but that might be just me. But yes,
well,
assisting.
the way, I mean, there are lots of words that you could use. I mean, I think about it as walking alongside. You're working with an individual or a team, and being very clear to them and to yourself that that's all you're doing, and that you're a temporary visitor to a very long history, complex system. And so it's about making a bit like homeopathy, if you like, the right difference just at the right point. Now, a more general answer to your lovely question would be as senior as possible, because in systemic work, we have to respect both the organizational system truth, the hidden dynamics and unwritten rules, and the organizational chart, who's actually in charge. And when you can hold both of those truths, then you can make a real difference. And you can make a difference even if you're not working with the most senior authority in the system. You can make a difference by, and this is another way that this work is a little bit different to other ways of coaching, by educating clients about the organizing principles of systems. What do we need to pay attention to if we're interested in creating organizational health? I haven't even touched on that in the webinar because, you know, there's only so much time, but there are very easily understood principles that maintain health in systems. When leaders are aware of them, as well as aware of the human needs, belonging, safety, and recognition, then they can make a real difference at whatever level they're at. Does that begin to
Yes.
answer? Thanks, Diana.
Thank you.
Lovely questions. Caroline Gask, you look like you've got a question.
Hi, John. I have a lot going on in my head, so I need to filter what I'm going to say somehow. Now, I think two things. The first thing is around what came up in our group, and it was funny because I was with another French lady, or at least a French passport holder. Let's put it that way.
Yes. Magic of things.
And we both said the important thing was about the resources that we put or that we have for ourselves, and then what are the resources that we can also help the client find. So I think this was a very important one. And I suppose, you know, I'm a coach, but my example was a personal situation. But I have these huge question marks around. I'm not here to change the system. I can't, and I won't be able to change it, especially if the system has a dynamic that doesn't necessarily work for me, right? And doesn't work for myself. So you were talking about leaving the system and how the system deals with that. So I was wondering, if that's something that we touch on as well, but what's the limit of when actually, you know, sometimes there is no point trying to belong by all means and trying to fix by all means. And sometimes there is a moment when you realize that, hey, maybe that system is not the one, especially when you try and break a pattern. Then something needs to shift and something needs to change. So that can also be part of the work and the realization and the conclusion, right?
I think what we're doing, I mean, I could talk for a couple of hours on any of these questions, but what this work does is shows the system to itself. So it's not you saying it's the client themselves revealing their own system and their truth about their place and voice in that system and how they find their authority or not. And the practice of the training is very much how you leave it with them and find a step to better, support them to find little steps to better. It's very light touch and kind of hands off and an inner posture of what I call radical compassion for everything just as it is. And as soon as you let go, of course, this is terrifying for many coaches, of trying to help or make a difference, then the magic starts to happen and you make a big difference by the combination of the stance, the principles and the practices. So I would say that 60% of this work is about your inner posture, your inner stance as a coach, and the willingness to let go of this need to make a huge difference. And that's when you will make a huge difference. As soon as you, this work is about returning responsibility to where it belongs. I mean, there are lots of ways of describing it, but that's what comes up for me in your question. How do we respectfully return responsibility to the system where it belongs? Because it's definitely not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to hold a safe space where the system can see its own truth and then create a different constellation. How I often ask clients, how do you want to fly together? A flock of birds, you know, in what shape and at what speed do you want to travel? So I very rarely use the word constellation with a client. Sometimes they ask afterwards, what was that exercise? Well, it was a constellation, but don't worry about that. They're finding their place and size, relative place, size and direction with each other. And to your point about resources, I think this is hugely underestimated, the simple power of representing resource and putting it into a system map to strengthen clients. This work is about returning strength and dignity to the system as a whole and the individuals and teams within it. And it's quite easy to do if you ask people to move their conscious awareness to what resources you, rather than tell me all about the problem all the time. So it's a way of strengthening clients, and representative maps are a wonderful visual, fast way of doing that.
Yeah, I love what you said about responsibility, what belongs to me, what belongs to others, and all together we create. You spoke about the flow of energy. So when you shift your own flow, because everything's interconnected, then necessarily the dynamic and the flow is going to shift as well. Yeah, but without trying to force the flow, right? Because that doesn't work. Yeah.
No, never. No.
Never. No, absolutely. Thank you, John.
You see, you know the answer already. It's the difficulty is embodying that, and I'm on a journey with that just as much as everybody else. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Tracy. Your microphone probably needs to be on. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to endorse what Caroline and how you just answered it, just in terms of personal experience. So I have limited experience in working with constellations, but one of the biggest insights for me has been how when you step into a constellation, how you discover your own patterns. And you know, the mantra in a lot of organizations, we work with teams or leaders, is we need to change, you need to change. There's this pressure on the system needs to change, other people need to change, the organization needs to change, the team needs to change, and it's all outward focused. But when you get into this kind of work and you start seeing your own pattern, then you understand that you are an intricate part of the system and that we very often carry these patterns unconsciously. And I like how light touch this work is, because it just reveals the pattern without judgment or censure in any way. So it's not that it shouldn't be like that. It is what it is. And the act of becoming conscious is kind of 90% of the job done, because when you're conscious, you can make choices. When you're unconscious, you don't. You just repeat the pattern. So yeah, just to endorse, you know, that point and say how powerful it is to work on this level, which is, you know, beyond intellect, and how much agency we actually have in our work as coaches and facilitators to unearth resourcefulness and insight for the client so that they can shift to where they want to go without having to persuade or push or rescue in any way.
Yeah. Thanks, Tracy. And you reminded me of the quote that I often use to describe the stance of this work, which is by the 13th century Persian poet known as Rumi. Out beyond ideas of right and wrong, there is a field. I'll meet you there. I don't think I've heard a more accurate and apposite description of the inner stance that you can inhabit once you get familiar with this work. And that's why it's experienced so respectfully, both in the trainings, but also when as a client receiving this work. And then, as you say, stepping into a constellation and allowing the system to reveal itself. If it's held in that space of no judgment and no right or wrong, it's incredibly powerful. And well, yeah, people often describe it as a mixture of profound and practical. That's what I love about this work.
It's very much tapping in a different field and source of wisdom. That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not outcome or goal orientated.
No.
And it's also not better than doing that, or it's just accessing a different kind of information. It's accessing invisible dynamics, deep patterns, loyalties and resources. I mean, that's the briefest possible summary of the work. It's not, you know, my hypothesis is clients, we as human beings can reach our goals quite happily if we're free and not entangled with something that we're not consciously aware of. As soon as we're not entangled, I don't need a coach to reach my goal. Thank you. I can just go and get it. So it's sort of getting under that and going. It's a little bit, yeah, it's different and a little bit. Its focus is on a different thing. And I suppose another way of summing up everything I've shared with you and that's in the book is that your client is the system, not the person or team or organization in front of you. It's the whole system. This work is about wholes. It's a holistic approach. So if you've studied Gestalt or TA, on which this work is also built, you'll recognize that quickly. It's in service of the flow of the whole, not you or this team or that team. So it's radical compassion and omnipartial. Everybody who belongs is treated with the same level of respect and has the same amount of voice and space. So yeah, it's all really about the stance. And then the method is, well, it takes time to learn it and to get out of the way of the method, but it's underpinned by the stance, really. So, in fact, I'm just going to show you two last slides. Those of you who are still here, thank you for being here. So yeah, the stance, I sort of said this, but it's a combination of an embodied distance, an inner distance, which you soon get once you realize you've got a peacock's tail feather full of joining, belonging and leaving behind you, just as your client does, combined with radical compassion. So that's different to empathy. And it's about keeping a certain distance and having a compassion for everybody and everything as it is. From that acceptance of what is, and movement will occur naturally. Your client is the system, and it's this shift from being helpful. This is what the article is about. I've just put in the chat, to being useful, and working beyond ideas of right and wrong. Sorry, I was going to go through this sequence. So yeah, that's what I've just said. That's the same words, different. And this I've already shared with you. I think everybody's familiar with this quote already. It just really underpins this approach. And the Hellinger quote I shared earlier. So yeah, stance and then principles. So the principles, what I said earlier, you know, what are the principles that support health? And it starts with an understanding of belonging and then the loyalties and dynamics that emerge from that. Understanding what resources and what limits flow. That's a kind of summary of the principles without going through them in detail. And then the practices of systemic mapping, facilitated constellations. So as I've said in the book, I think any coach can invite a client to make a map, to create a physical map or a digital map, But how do you facilitate that systemically? That's obviously what we're teaching about. And then, yeah, this is the training which Kate's been kind enough to mention already. So I'll be in Sydney for a couple of weeks doing the same training the week before this, and then coming to New Zealand. If you're interested in more, then go to Coaching Constellations /Australasia, and you'll see all the work that I'm doing this year across. There you go. There's a nice little visual to end on. So yeah, how we doing? We've got 10 minutes. So
Hello, John. I'm
Yes.
not sure. Can you hear me? Hi, it's Larry here.
Hi, Larry.
Hi, I'm in Wellington. Your training is in Auckland. So there were two questions on the remote digital side of your approach. I do a lot of work with teams. So I heard one-on-one, but I wondered, how it worked with teams, or is it a bit complex? Because I see a little bit of a chess game happening in a way, and I didn't know whether that physicality detracted from the impact. So that was the first one. And the second one was the online. So if someone's not in Auckland, whether or not there is an online offering. So two questions there.
Okay, the online, which I mean, we offer the same training online. However, it's in UK/European time zone, so that would be a bit tricky, but probably for you, unless you like being up all night. But you're very welcome to come to Auckland, which it's not quite as far as coming from London. So I'll race you.
Yes.
Were you here from the beginning? Because I covered quite
Yes.
a lot about teams earlier. Yeah, so there's what I said earlier about teams. And then there's a lot in the book, including I think 6 exercises you could probably use, without too much more knowledge straight away. The other thing about online, I'll just very, very, very quickly demonstrate how it might work online. So this is a digital version of, here's a picture of the physical kit.
Yes, excellent.
We've created a kit which you can, use and look at, relative place and size. What I love about the digital version, which we were quite stunned by in the pandemic when we created it, is that relative size is, of course, much easier to, let's say that's a representative for the thing that we don't talk about in this business. The relative size of that thing can be expressed rather effectively. You can also bring in things to represent resources, and you can duplicate things very easily, etc. Now, I've used this a lot with teams, and at particularly the second level of the training, it's a 3-part training. We covered teams in some depth. Teams and individuals are covered pretty much equally all through the training journey, because most people that come, even those that aren't interested in teams, there's a huge amount to learn about teams. Even if you only coach individuals, they will probably be connected to or in a team. So it's important to understand teams as well, I think.
Great. Thank you, John. Appreciate that.
Welcome. That's a short answer to another great question. Thanks.
One more question from me, if that's okay.
Sure.
I would imagine that this work is very much applicable to coaching a, say, stay-at-home mom or a teenager, because there's a lot of talk about in organizations and teams, but it would be really applicable. And
I don't think its application has any limits. There are people who specialize in just using it in schools with children. There are people who use it only in governmental situations. There are other coaches who specialize, I'm one of them, in working with founders and family businesses. That's a particular passion of mine. Do you have children yourself, Iona?
Yes, I do.
Have you ever tried coaching them? Generally doesn't go well, does
I'm
it?
trying to shift to it. It's the work of the last 15 years to shift from parenting to coaching,
Yeah.
from
I'll
telling
take
them
that as a,
teaching to coaching. Yeah.
I'll take that as a no. I've been coaching for 25 years. I'm trying coaching my children. It doesn't go well. They don't want you to coach. They want you to be their parent. There's one exception to that, and I'm thinking of my youngest son. I've got two sons, both are in their early 30s now. But when the youngest one was 16 and doing what they call A levels here, you know, the final exams of school, I did a constellation of visual mapping with him in the garden using objects and bits of paper and things. Never sort of said what it was or anything like that, because that would have made it about me. And he found it profoundly useful in choosing his subjects and then later in choosing universities. Not making a big thing about it or saying, let's do a coaching session. But so this method, I think, is a bit more accessible for people who are resistant to coaching, whether they're children or chief executives. And I developed my practice in this, and I've described this in the book, I think, in chemistry checks. When I was a rookie coach 20 years ago, I was working as an associate for a big international coaching company. I was the least experienced. And I used to say to these clients, you know, that you meet for a chemistry check when you've got 20 minutes and then the next coach comes in. Rather than talking about me or how clever or skillful I was, I'd ask them, just show me with coffee cups or thermos flasks or flip chart pens where you are in the organization and what the difficulties you'd like to resolve. So in other words, I sort of did some very rudimentary mapping, and every single client that I used that with appointed me, because they weren't appointing me, they were appointing the method that I was using. They were already in their material, and when it's visualized, you can't unsee it. So they then look up and go, well, I'm working with you then. Okay, fine. So it's very accessible. You hold it lightly. Don't make it special. Just invite people to map what's true for you. And it's liberating for them and them for you.
Thank you.
Welcome. What do they say to actors? Never work with children or animals. Never coach children or animals, I'd say. But you can invite them to do something else which doesn't feel like coaching, which this work sort of is.
So we're probably coming near to the end now. Just wanted to say a big thank you to John and for all your expertise and knowledge. It's been really amazing to hear and to get that taste of what's to come. So super keen to get involved and to see you in May. Mariska, will we send the survey by email, or do we have a QR code? It's going to be an email.
Yeah,
So
I think because we have quite a few people that's already needed to exit, we'll email it through.
Awesome. So thank you, Mariska, for your help with the tech. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Lovely to see so many people on board, and hope to see you all in May, or some of you. No one was going to get in. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely day ahead.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Bye now.
Right, we'll stop recording.